All right, let's welcome in Adam McKay. Adam, thank you so much for joining us. We were just talking before we recorded, and we were reliving the very first time that we met, and the only time that we've met in person, which was, I don't know, you said it was about 5 or 6 years ago. It seems like it was longer, but it was sometime when I was playing for the Clippers.
And I was outside Funny or Die, and you pointed out that I was smoking a heater. And by the way, always call cigarettes heaters. That's a good rule of life. And I was reminiscing that those were the days when I was one of the last jackasses in the world. It was like, I'm going to smoke for 20 years. And since then, I've had a heart scare, so I don't have those carefree days anymore. But I got lucky. I'm in good shape. And the other thing I remembered to make me the double loser was my first comment to you was, wow, you're taller than I thought you would be.
I get that a lot, though.
Yeah,
I do
I'm
get
a cool
that a
guy. I'm a cool guy.
Super fan over here. You have two NBA projects going on right now. We're going to talk about those. We're really excited about them. We'll break them down a little bit. But I know you've been sort of an NBA. You called yourself an NBA junkie. You've been an NBA junkie for most of your life. I was thinking about my own sort of first NBA memories, which were Michael Jordan's Bulls in the early 90s. Those were my first real basketball memories, that and Duke basketball. Do you remember your first NBA memories and what players or teams really had an impact on you?
Yeah, I talk about this in the podcast, Death at the Wing, that we released. And it was that line kind of where a lot of us got hip to the NBA. I'm obviously older than you guys. I'm 52. So for my generation, it was 1978, 79. And I had moved to Philadelphia from Worcester, Massachusetts, and we had Dr. J. So that's kind of most of what you have to know. And then boom, just like that, Magic Johnson and Larry Bird entered the league. And I had grown up in Worcester, so I still had Celtics fandom running through my blood before I'd shifted over to the Sixers. So it was double for me. It was Dr. J. And the first memory, the one that to this day I still remember, is the up and under, the Dr. J up and under in the 1980s championship series between the Sixers and the Lakers, where it looked like he was just walking on the air. And that was when my friends and I started to go, all right, it's not bad watching Larry Boa turn a double play or watching Gary Maddox catch a fly ball, but this seems a lot cooler. Don't get me wrong, I like watching Bill Bergey, try and blitz on a double team for the Eagles, but watching a guy walk on the air seems a little bit cooler. Plus, his nickname is Dr. J. So that was it. That was the first time I got the taste, was the up and under.
It's so interesting because we had Dr. J on the podcast, and he's so well known for his highlights. You've got the up and under, you've got the rock the cradle on Michael Cooper, you've got his dunk against Bill Walton, but there's not a lot of game footage on him. And we meant to ask Dr. J about this. What was his game like? Because there's for even a fan like me of the NBA, who appreciates the history and all the great players that came before my generation, there's just not a lot of opportunities for us to watch real footage of these guys.
So that was one of the treats that I had. Was I lived in Philadelphia, so we had the UHF channel, whatever it was, 48 or whatever. You could watch half their games on TV. So we hardcore watched Dr. J. And there was two eras of Dr. J in Philly. The first era was like pre-Moses Malone, where it was Doc's team. And that was kind of a different thing because that was Doc doing everything. That was him posting up. He had a decent jump shot. It wasn't great, wasn't bad. He liked to kiss it off the glass. But the thing that people forget about Dr. J was the guy was a beast in the post. He was so quick and long, and he would spin on you and throw it down in your face. Like, it was a little bit like Larry Nance, a little bit Shawn Kemp, if I can sprinkle some Shawn Kemp in there.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. And so that was the thing, was Dr. J was the first part of Dr. J in Philly was nasty. And then the second part of Dr. J, which was Moses Malone, Andrew Toney, that's the team that won the championship, he went from fourth or fifth gear to like third gear to kind of fit, having an all-world player like Moses Malone and Tony and Mo Cheeks and all these guys. And that was the smoother Dr. J. That was the Dr. J where you would see him sort of take off like a swan, and you would see the finger rolls. Like, he did a lot of beautiful finger rolls off the glass, going to the hoop. And that's when he became the graceful statesman. So there were kind of two phases of Dr. J.
Adam, so your new podcast, Death at the Wing, it focuses on the intersection of basketball, politics, and sort of social effects that led to a bunch of untimely deaths of different basketball players, mainly in the 80s. How did you choose this particular? It's such a great topic, but it's also so specific. And I know, it makes sense with the kind of projects you work on, but how did you sort of choose to go this particular route?
So mostly it was just being a fan for years and years. I noticed in doing the what if game with people, which we all do, we would do the what if about Len Bias. What if he had played? Would he have been Jordan's rival? The what if about Reggie Lewis? Which direction did the Celtics go? And then I just, at one point, it's about 7-8 years ago, I started noticing that what if list is awfully long. You got Drazen Petrovic, you got Benji Wilson, and Bobby Phil, like all these players from that era that died. And then I just started looking at other sports and wondering, is there that kind of era in any other sports? And I couldn't find it. The closest thing I found was the NFL with CTE and concussion for players who have retired, and some players while they're playing. But that's not even quite the scope of how many young stars died in the 80s and 90s. So I was going to write it way back in the day. I was thinking, because I'm friends with a friend of mine wrote for Slam. So I was going to, Tom Sharpling, and I was going to ask him if I could write this as an article for Slam magazine. And then I was just busy. And we happened to land in this great situation with our new company, Hyperobject, with Sony and 3 Uncanny 4 to do podcasts. And I was like, all right, if ever there was a podcast, this is a podcast. And then we dug into it, and it wasn't like one smoking gun. It was more the explosion of fame, the change in culture of the 80s, where people were rich in a way they'd never been rich, where the media and cable TV was exploding in a way that, back in the 70s and 60s, you wouldn't even get recognized walking down the street if you played for the Sixers. And now suddenly with cable TV, everyone was just, that was it. And so it was really kind of a lifestyle thing. It was also about being Black in America, being African-American in America when Reagan was there, veering everything towards flag waving and kind of scapegoating African-Americans. And we realized really what this was just a portrait of the 80s with these tragedies kind of as time posts through it. That's kind of how we came up with it. It's a big, ambitious story, but the team we had behind it, Jody Avergan, who's worked with ESPN a lot, just pulled in these crazy great guests like Jane Mayer, and then at the same time, Jerry West and Jackie McMullen and Robert Reich, the former, Treasury Secretary for Bill Clinton. And it ended up becoming this mishmash of politics and sports.
It sounds pretty amazing. And I'm curious if we can just get a little bit more insight on the political scope of this, and just sort of some things you learned in your research and your writing about this era. I was born in 1984. I have no memory of the Reagan era. The earliest I remember any sort of presidential thing was the war in Iraq, the original one, and then the 1992 election. My mom and dad were devastated that Bill Clinton won. So I have no real recollection of this era. And you were older, and so you sort of lived through this. What were some insights that you learned from doing the research on this?
So I grew up on the dividing line between the 60s and 70s and the 80s. So I was a little kid in the 70s, and I remembered kind of you still had LBJ's Great Society. The public schools were funded. We had incredible teachers. Our family was dirt poor, so we were on food stamps, but it wasn't a big deal. It was like you had support. Like my mom was a waitress, but we never felt poor because there was always things you could go to. She got Pell Grants. She went back to college. I was able to go to Temple University, which at the time cost like $800 a semester. So I got to grow up with kind of the benefit of the 60s and 70s and all that support that you were getting. And in the 80s, it was like a change, just a shift happened. And suddenly everyone had posters of Porsches on their dorm room walls. Like suddenly everyone was like, I'm going to Wall Street. I'm going to get rich. And I remember being like, what is going on? And the movies got like super militaristic and jacked up. It was like, Red Dawn, like guys yelling Wolverine, Rambo coming out of a swamp with machine guns. In the 70s, people didn't like the military. People were suspicious of flag waving. Like people were into the arts. Like there was a movie called One-on-One with Robbie Benson in the 70s, where he was a basketball player who meets a groovy hippie chick and like ends up becoming a great basketball player while learning how to make love and drink wine from like a Boda bag with his hippie chick girlfriend. Like that was the vibe of the 70s. And then in the 80s, it was like, I don't think Blue Chips came out in the 80s, but it was like Blue Chips. It was like, hardcore, let's win, let's get rich, bling, bling. And so it's hard to express how much the change was and how fast it was. Like in 2-3 years, America became a completely different experience.
I want to just follow up what you just said, because I sometimes see these comments on social media or occasionally an article about sort of the long-term effects of the Reagan era. And I want to just get your perspective on what are sort of the lasting effects that are still relevant in today's American society from that era.
Well, it's interesting because the answer to this question could apply to the NBA and it could also apply to America. For the NBA, it was really freeing and it was great because it was an era that wanted stars, and you had NBA players who weren't wearing football helmets, who weren't busy, catching routine fly ball after routine fly ball in 4-hour baseball games. So it was a great launching pad for the NBA, but the NBA learned from it. Like the NBA, from those initial tragedies with guys like doing drugs or driving cars too fast, I think the NBA is now better at being famous than any other sports league. Like LeBron James is incredible at being famous, whereas the other sports didn't entirely learn. As far as our country as a whole, I really view it that we are still living in the Reagan Revolution. I don't think it ever stopped. I think all the language, all the mythology of it, all the policy decisions, cut taxes for the rich, come up with flat tax things like sales taxes for the poor, come up with gas taxes, cigarette taxes, the militarization, the fact that we spend $800 billion a year on our military, yet we're not even really at war. We have an occupation in Afghanistan, but it's a World War III budget, even though we're not at war. All that stuff is still fully in play. I don't think it's ever been interrupted. And by the way, I would include Bill Clinton in that, even though technically he was a Democrat. He really ruled like a Republican if you look at what he did. And he went by the Republican playbook, which is, feed the wealthy, feed the big corporations, get their donations for your campaign, scapegoat the poor. You look at what Bill Clinton did, cutting welfare, increasing penalties for people being caught with drugs, filling out the prison system. That was Reagan and Bill Clinton. So I really look at it where America's at right now. We're in the end state of kind of the Reagan Revolution. This is the final act, because how can our country possibly get more right-wing than we are right now? I mean, it's almost hard to imagine. It's a really impactful time. It's when that whole mythology was kind of laid out for the first time, and it is just stuck.
Adam, it's funny. We talk all the time, sort of obviously on the show, about politics in the NBA and its current state, and we've had, a number of players on who've talked about it in different settings and everything like that. When you were doing your research and you were making this, was it funny? Like look at last year, for example, like with what happened in the bubble, was it not funny is probably the wrong word. Is it interesting to look at how the league has so dramatically changed really across the board from the, guys like LeBron and CP on down to the rookies? in terms of how active the players are now?
It's incredible. I mean, it's really something that the league, and JJ as a member of the league, you guys should be really proud of, because my joke with how much America is sort of running on 3 flat tires in the last 5 to 10 to 20 years, whatever you want to call it, is like, there's only 2 things that work in America. It's the NBA and Taco Bell. That's about it. Like everything else seems to be broken, but Taco Bell is always going to churn out some weird pseudo-Mexican food creation that you can't resist. And the NBA has just been on point for like 20 years. So yeah, it's incredible. I mean, the fact that your league actually used stadiums to like have people come register to vote and to vote, that like tangibly made a difference in an election. And meanwhile, you have other leagues that can't even let a guy like Colin Kaepernick just take a knee during the anthem. But the NBA wasn't always that way. We're going to do an episode about Craig Hodges and Chris Jackson, now known as Abdul Rauf. I can't quite say his name, Abdul Rauf. He was kind of blackballed from the league. So was Craig Hodges for speaking up about politics. So the NBA learned from its mistakes. It seems like a lot of other institutions in America didn't.
I think so much of the backlash to some of that from Craig and Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, and also sort of the dress code that was put in place in 2005 had to do with these flashpoint events. And you're going to cover this on the podcast, of course, but the cocaine and crack cocaine epidemic of the 80s was a large part of NBA culture. And so there were strict rules in place because of that. Guys were getting banned. They enacted drug testing. And then, of course, following the Malice in the Palace in 2004, there was all sorts of new rules, including the dress code. It goes right along with exactly what we're talking about in sort of creating this mythology, but also catering to sort of, I don't know how to say this, but catering to the white corporate crowd.
Well, that was where the NBA got in trouble. I mean, when they would try and jam the NBA into a box for like white America, it didn't work. And I think finally the lesson for the NBA was like, this is an African-American league predominantly, and that's a good thing. And, let's face it, like African-American culture is American culture. And you see the same thing happen with hip hop, where I remember in the 80s getting those first tracks from Curtis Blow and Run DMC and like obscure people like Steady B, who was based out of Philly, or Schoolie D. And everyone was like, oh, this is a novelty. This is just for African-American culture. And then all of a sudden, you just saw the big record companies wake up and go, oh no, this is going to become the dominant music. And the NBA had the same moment. Allen Iverson's a great example. I mean, I remember the white sports writers always just bitching about Allen Iverson. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's the most enjoyable player in the league. Like, I can't get enough of him. And then you look at how history's been rewritten on Allen Iverson. Now he's celebrated. Now everyone kind of gets what he really stood for and what he brought to the league. But all credit to the league, man. They learned the lessons. They embraced the culture. They embraced the players. They gave player empowerment. They stopped trying to use a closed fist to hold the water, and instead loosened up and let the league be what it needed to be. And it's really an amazing story where so many other institutions did not. They went the other direction.
By my math, you've been an NBA fan for about 43 years now. I believe you're also producing the first episode of it's Untitled, but the new HBO series on the 1980s Showtime Lakers. We talk about this a lot on the podcast, but I like to talk about sort of the different eras of the NBA. And I think you have the sort of pre-merger era, and then you have what I like to think of, again, I wasn't alive when this started, but the sort of Magic Larry era. Then you have MJ's era, then you have Kobe Shaq era, and now we are still somehow living in the LeBron era.
You skipped one era, if I respectfully.
Yes, of course.
It was short, the Shawn Kemp era, which was 18 months long. But anyway, continue.
I'm going to have a follow-up question on that in a second. But There's a lot of fans that like to sort of stan for a specific era. Oh, 90s I really enjoyed 90s basketball when the score was 74-72 and people were just grabbing and holding each other and there was no spacing and no flow to the game. There's people that say that, of course. It seems to me like you're appreciative of all the different eras in the NBA.
Yeah, I mean, to me, what's so significant about Magic and those Showtime Lakers was like we're talking about that cultural change. That was the Showtime Lakers. I mean, it was Dr. J and it was the Showtime Lakers. And Magic and Magic, we forget he was a new style point guard, but he also bridged the old era of the big man by having Kareem and knowing how to play with Kareem and yet create this fast break style. That's where the stars came to the forum. That's where suddenly like basketball was cool on a level we'd never imagined. So that series, I think, is going to be incredible because it gets right inside that world and you see it all come together scene by scene in a way that I don't think a lot of shows have. As far as, appreciating the different eras, I'll just never forget that, like, it was like a light switch coming on, watching Jordan drop that 63 on the Celtics and watching Magic Johnson, do those cradle no-look passes leading the break. Charles Barkley like rumbling down the court and like almost breaking the rim every time he dunked so hard with like such an anger that like Public Enemy name checked him in a rap. Like that was so exciting for us while the hip hop was like right behind it happening. Like I remember going to the Fresh Fest in 1986 at the Spectrum and having the police look at me and, a white dorky guys walking in and going, you shouldn't go in there. And then we go in and get high with a Puerto Rican guy in the top level and watch Stetsasonic MCs just like, and Public Enemy with the crowd rush the stage. Like nothing will ever capture the magic of that time for me just because of my age.
Sure.
But I'd be a fool if I wasn't going to tell you that like watching this last All-Star game with what Dame Lillard and Steph and guys like you do shooting from like 28 feet, like this sniper era that we're in now, and how much it's opened up the court and watching like Zion Williamson play point guard. Like I'm having a blast. Like this era is just off the charts fun.
I say it all the time, but the skill level of guys coming in the NBA, of young players coming in the NBA is at an all-time high. Just your basic skill level in terms of ball handling, shooting, footwork, it's so impressive to me, and I love where the league is at in terms of skill and the quality of play and where we're headed. We have so many young stars in this league. You're gonna have to explain the Shawn Kemp era, though. I need to know why there was allegedly an 18-month Shawn Kemp era.
It was definitely not an era. I'm 100% kidding. However, I do have a really good Shawn Kemp story for you if you'd like it. It involves Will Ferrell and the writing of the script Elf. So Ferrell and I try and get Anchorman made. This is back in 2001, something like that. No one will make it. Every studio in town says no. So Ferrell's like, look, I got to do this project. It's the only movie I have that's greenlit, and it's where I'm a grown man who is an elf. And I'm like, dude, you can't do that. And he's like, it's all I got. And he goes, will you rewrite it? Let's at least make sure it's good. And I go, all right, man, I'll rewrite it. And so they put me in a hotel room over in Santa Monica, this little hotel. I can't even remember the name of it, but it was right by the ocean, beautiful little place. And I just lived there and I would rewrite. And Ferrell and Jon Favreau, the director, would come by during the day after I'd rewritten all night and we would go through what I've done. And every morning I would notice the hall right across from me, the room across the hall, there'd be a tray out front with like 3 empty pizza plates on it. And I'd be like, ooh, someone's chowing down. And I like to eat. So I wasn't judging. I was just curious. And about 5 days into my rewrite, I look out and there's Shawn Kemp. There's the Rainmaker outside leaving his room. And I'm like, holy shit, Ferrell, it's Shawn Kemp. And we realized he was kind of at the tail end of his career. He'd had his run with the Cavaliers. And we sort of put it together that he's in town probably to meet with the Lakers and the Clippers. And he's looking for a last act to his career. So every day I'm in there rewriting Elf, and those guys come by and we see Shawn Kemp walking by, and every day I see 2-3 empty pizza plates. And Favreau does the old trick of I'm standing by the door and Favreau yells, hey, Shawn, and then ducks away. So, Kemp just looks at dorky me standing in the doorway. And at the end of the rewrite, we start realizing, hey, I think this script's pretty good. Like, I actually think we did a good job. And so the last day I'm like, screw it. And I go out and I go up to Kemp and I just go, hey man, I'm sorry to bother you. I've been over here rewriting this script. And he's like, yeah, I was wondering what you guys were doing. I go, would you sign this front page of the script for me? And he goes, yeah, of course, man. And I go, hey, I'm a big fan. Loved you and Peyton, what you did in Seattle. Hope your career keeps going. So to this day, one of my most cherished possessions is unofficial first rough draft of Elf signed by Shawn Kemp.
That's phenomenal.
It's an NFT. It's a one-of-one item.
Look, everyone hates moving. You never realize how much stuff you have until you start packing it all up. And even worse is the hassle of moving heavy furniture, taking it apart, putting it back together. It can be a total nightmare. I know, I've moved plenty of times. This is my 6th team. But now there's a furniture brand that might make this whole process a lot easier, because it might as well be made for moving. Burrow. Burrow's innovative modular design and super helpful instructions make assembling and disassembling your furniture quick and hassle-free. That's why, when it's time to move, your Burrow furniture won't hold you back.
It's designed for the way you live. Their credenzas are perfect for your TV with adjustable height interior shelves and cord organizing holes at each corner. Their award-winning Nomad sofa has a built-in USB charger, and the cushions are incredibly wide and deep. Because, let's face it, if you're going to be watching your favorite teams win, or in some of our listeners' cases, lose, you might as well be comfortable, right?
When your favorite teams play, they lose, Tommy. Let's be honest. You're a Bears fan.
I'm a Cubs fan, too. Most of my favorite teams lose. I don't have any teams currently besides, I guess, the Mavericks that I'm cheering for that win. Everyone else loses.
You can ditch the warehouse and shop online. Everything is designed to work perfectly together in your living space, so all you've got to do is add it to your cart. Plus, Burrow's world-class support team is available for you whenever you need them. And to top it all off, Burrow offers fast, free shipping on every order. That's right, free shipping. So be smart and avoid the moving pitfalls. Right now, you can add $75 off your first order at burrow.com/JJ. That's Burrow, BURROW.com/JJ for $75 off your Burrow purchase. One more time, that's burrow.com/JJ. Looking back, why was Anchorman so hard to get the go for?
Yeah, part of it was just Will was still new. He hadn't taken the leap. He'd done a couple SNL movies like Night at the Roxbury and Ladies Man and some stuff like that. But he hadn't taken the big leap towards the studio movies. And comedy, you guys know, comedy's just tricky. It's like if you think something's funny, you think it's funny. If you don't, you don't. And, Ferrell and I kind of had a style that we like to do. And we're going around to studio heads who are 50, 60 years old, trying to tell them that we want to have a gang fight where anchormen fight each other with nets and horses and set each other on fire. And, no hard feelings to these studio heads. You can only laugh at what you laugh at. You can't force people to think it's funny. And so I always give huge credit to Todd Phillips, who cast Ferrell in Old School. And that's what broke him first, was his performance in Old School. And then, of course, Elf came out right after it. Then we got the call going, all right, they want to make Anchorman. So, yeah, without Todd Phillips, I don't know if I'm here today.
First of all, I think I was going into my sophomore year of college when Anchorman came out. And I think it was sophomore year. And I must have seen it like 5 or 6 times in the theater. And of course, to this day, it's one of my favorite Will Ferrell movies. So on this podcast, we with certain guests we draft, and one of the drafts we've done in the past was a Will Ferrell draft. We drafted Will Ferrell movies. You couldn't pick what somebody else picked, but I'm curious, do you have a favorite Will movie?
Well, I would have to, of course, knock them into 2 categories: the ones that I've been involved in and the ones that I haven't.
Of course,
if we're just chucking them all in the same basket, for me, it's Step Brothers. That was the one where we felt like we were getting away with something the most, where like I couldn't believe a giant studio was giving us money, that professionals were showing up with like really nice cameras and lights, that like Academy Award actors like Mary Steenburgen, Richard Jenkins, John C. Reilly, great actors like Catherine Hahn were showing up on set and actually seriously making this movie with us. So I'll always just have a soft spot for that movie because it's the most unhinged one that Ferrell and I did. It to this day still makes me laugh if I stumbled. I mean, all of them do. I love Anchorman, but yeah, I'd go Step Brothers.
Tommy, is that your favorite?
That's my number one.
That's my number one too. I also would say I think it's aged the best. Like it's still just such a great rewatch even now.
It's funny how it's aged so well. I mean, some of the Anchorman stuff, we were obviously mocking, like guys who were sexist and kind of creeps. But some of that stuff, is a little dicier as far as how it plays today. I think there's only one moment in Step Brothers that's a little cringy, which is Adam Scott calls Riley and Ferrell the F word, the homophobic word, which I have to explain, back then was like every frat guy called his little brother that. There was like, it's a sad time in our nation's history, but in the 90s, people use that word with abandon. So, but other than that one moment, you're right. It actually holds up pretty damn well.
Do you have any like what if castings that you thought were going to happen and didn't end up happening that you feel like would have changed the tenor of any of these?
The craziest one we had was when we were auditioning for Anchorman. We had Amy Adams audition for the Applegate role, and she was incredible. But she looked really young. And later I told Amy Adams, because I've obviously worked with her a couple times, I go, we almost cast you in that, but you just it felt weird because you looked like you were, how old were you back then? 19, 20? She goes, no, I was 26 or whatever. I go, you got to be kidding me. You looked 19. So it was between her and Applegate, but I feel really good about how that worked out. Applegate knocked that out of the park. She was incredible. And that was a case where everything worked out the way it should have. We then got to have Amy in Talladega Nights. I then got to work with her on Vice. So all is well with that. But that was a close one. That was a weird one. And then the other one was, it was between Rudd and Bob Odenkirk to play Brian Fantana. And I mean, to the point where like the studio came in, it was so 50-50. We couldn't pick which one. And I think the only reason, Rudd's crazy funny and a good friend of mine, but the reason he got it was he was a professional actor, and like Odenkirk had been on like Mr. Show and was mostly a writer. And the studio was like, call us conservative, but maybe go with the actor. And of course, since then, Odenkirk's become a wildly successful actor. So I look at Ferrell and go, hey, we have pretty good taste on that one. Like Odenkirk's had a great acting career.
How long did it take to pick the names for Anchorman?
I'm not kidding when I tell you this. 2 weeks. 2 weeks of constantly switching them. Second guessing, Ferrell coming in the room going, I think I got a good one. What about Brian Fantana? And me going, I don't know, man. I like Curtis Nightfish. And like us arguing the names over. We couldn't write the script until we got the names right. It took us 4 days to get Ron Burgundy. I mean, we had 25 names for that. It was an unprofessional amount of time that we spent on those names.
That's tremendous.
That's amazing.
I want to ask about your pivot in a second, but just as a general question I have, because we're going to ask about your sort of pivot to the more serious stuff, but when you're on set and you're filming a comedic movie versus a serious or drama movie, is there a difference in the amount of takes that a given scene has? Because you always watch at the end of a great comedic movie, you get the outtakes, or back when we used to have DVDs, there was the second DVD that came in the set with all the different outtake scenes, which of course I watched. But it just seems like there would be more to get through if you're just off the cuff like some of these movies are.
You spot on. There were days at the end of Step Brothers where my head felt like I had pulled a muscle in my head because we had been improvising so much and so ceaselessly. I always tell this story. It was one day that Riley and Ferrell come up to me before we're even going to do the first shot. And I'm like, oh, something's going on. Like, they want to talk to me. And they're like, hey, Ferrell and I were talking, like, just for this one day, can we not improvise? We're exhausted. And I just said, I go, you guys don't have to improvise. I'll just yell stuff out on the mic. I'll yell out ideas. And Riley just turned to Ferrell. Was like, I told you he'd say no. It's a massive difference. And not to say that we don't improvise when we go a little more dramatic, because there's plenty of good improv in Big Short, and some even in Vice, as dark as that movie was. But, Ryan Gosling did a ton of improv. Brad Pitt did a ton of improv. Obviously, Carell did. So there is improv in those movies, even though they lean a little more serious. There's still funny moments in them. But I was laughing during Big Short at the end of days. We would get done like 45 minutes or an hour early. And I would joke that it felt downright European. We're like, let's go out to dinner. Like, I can actually have a nice night's sleep. So yeah, it's a huge difference. And on Succession as well, once again, even though there's funny stuff in it, we would improvise on some lines, but we weren't constantly attacking the way we were with Anchorman, Step Brothers, Talladega Nights, the other guys, Anchorman 2, all those movies were constant attack every single scene with improv.
Adam, I want to compare the movie set to an NBA locker room for a second. And I feel like you're the perfect person to answer this. We haven't really had anyone on who's sort of better than you to answer this. Big Short is a good example of this. Obviously, this Netflix movie you have coming out later this year is another example of this, where you just have these insane casts of characters. A lot of movies have good casts, but like it's on a different level of all kinds of Oscar winners, and you can't believe everyone's on the same project. JJ's been in a few locker rooms that are like this NBA wise. Obviously, there's a few teams in the league that are like this NBA wise now, where there's just a lot of firepower, and part of the job of the coach is to manage all of that, and basically to make sure that everybody gets along and everybody's happy, because it doesn't matter how much talent you have if everyone's at each other's throats. Do you feel like you were always naturally good at that, or you like learned things along the way to get better at it?
A lot of my upbringing was that I came out of the improvisational scene in Chicago, and that whole scene was predicated on groups of people improvising and collaborating. So I think a lot of those foundations, they come from like Del Close and Viola Spolin and all these improv teachers. A lot of those foundations help with this. But the other thing, and I'm guessing JJ might say the same thing about some of those great teams he's been on, is when you get really, really good people, they don't bullshit around. They're not playing head games. Like Christian Bale's not having ego pissing contests. Like Amy Adams, Brad Pitt, like they're so good and they're at that level for a reason, which is they don't do that kind of bullshit. So you'd be surprised. Like The Big Short was just a pleasure. Like Vice was just a pleasure. I just did this Don't Look Up with DiCaprio and Lawrence and Meryl Streep. They're the coolest people in the world. Like they only care about the scene. That's what they're sweating about. They're not sweating about the vibe. They're not sweating about power struggles. None of that garbage gets in there. So it's sort of like Mike D'Antoni, where when you give like Mike D'Antoni has the players, when he has James Harden, when he has, Chris Paul, it worked. I'm guessing those guys, yeah, you can get into some ego shit when like D'Antoni got fired, then it got a little weird in Houston. But is that your experience, JJ, that when you're with really good people, those power games don't tend to like play out? Maybe it's different in the league. I don't know.
No, it's actually a really good question, Tom. It's a really good comparison too, because I do think on the really good teams that I've been on, there is a seriousness to preparation. There's a seriousness to the daily approach and the daily process, and there's an enjoyment to that. There's an appreciation for that. In terms of the ego side of it, I think that the super teams and the teams with a lot of star power that do really well are able in some ways to sort of put their egos to the side and just really focus on winning. And I think that's actually very hard to do in the NBA, because a lot of times people are at different stages of their career. Maybe one guy's really talented, but he hasn't hit that max contract yet. Maybe another guy's looking for that third contract and he's in a free agency year. So there's all these external factors sometimes. The other thing I would say is, like, to CP's point, you need someone on set, you need someone on court, you need someone in the locker room, you need a voice, you need someone who's going to dictate that a little bit. And I think a lot of times in the NBA, guys sort of follow suit. What is the director's role in all of this in terms of leadership? Like, how would you summarize this when you're working with star power? How would you summarize what your role is?
Yeah, every director's different, obviously. I mean, it's actually remarkable how different you can be as a director. There are directors that really are focused on the lighting and the lenses and the camera. Like, that's almost 99% their thing. There are directors who are 100% about the actors. There are directors who are all about storyboarding everything. Like David Mamet used to storyboard every movie he would do, and it just fit together like a puzzle piece, and who are really regimented and wanted exactly like the way they want it. Scorsese does that. He has these incredible shots all set up ahead of time. So every director's different. I think a lot of it is based on trust, of course. The story I always tell is I'm working with Sam Jackson. We're on the other guys. He's inside the car. We're doing a green screen thing, and I'm yelling out alternate lines for him to say. And I yell out an alternate line, and he just goes, "I'm not going to say that." And the whole crew freezes. And they're like, they haven't heard anyone say this to me. And I just go, "Sam, if it sucks, I'm not going to use it." And there's a pause, and I go, "Honest to God, you could come in the edit room. I'll show you what I used." And there's a beat, and he goes, "Give me the line again." And he says it, and then from then on, all Sam Jackson wants to do is play and come up with alternative lines. So I think when you kind of show your open hands to your actors and be like, "Hey, I'm here to make it work too. I'll let you in the edit room. I'll let you see what I'm doing." They then are able to trust you. But I'm not a yeller. I'm not a like exert my authority kind of guy. We're all there because we want to be there. I believe the looser and freer the environment, the more it lets people do their best work. So I'll keep the trains, running on time. I'll make sure we're staying focused on the scene where it needs to go, and I'll throw out notes on that. But otherwise, my opinion is you're there because I hired you because you're amazing. Let's let you do it. You do. It'd be like someone telling you, set a pick, then go to the dunker's position. I don't want you shooting from outside 15 feet. Like, no, we got JJ Redick to make it rain. Why would we do that? So that's kind of my approach.
Basketball season won't be around forever, so get in on all of the action now with DraftKings, the leader in one-day fantasy sports. DraftKings is giving new players a free shot at millions of dollars in total prizes. Claim your free shot at millions of dollars in total prizes when using code JJ during signup.
Playing daily fantasy basketball is simple. Just pick your lineup, stay under the salary cap, and see how your team stacks up against the competition. Feel the sweat like never before. Every dunk, steal, assist means so much more with the DraftKings Daily Fantasy lineup. Baseball fans, you may have missed out on a season-long fantasy last year, so now is your time to get in on all of the daily fantasy action, where DraftKings has even more ways to make it rain.
With DraftKings, payday comes every day for players. So what are you waiting for? Head to the app now. Download the DraftKings app and use code JJ during signup. This week, DraftKings is putting you in the action with a free shot at millions of dollars in total prizes. That's code JJ, and you can get a free shot at millions of dollars in prizes only at DraftKings. Minimum $5 deposit required. Eligibility restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com for details. What interferes with your happiness? Is something preventing you from achieving your goals? Well, now there's an app that can help you get past life's roadblocks, and that's BetterHelp. BetterHelp makes it easy. You can connect in a safe and private online environment and can start communicating in under 48 hours. Once you're connected, BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. It's not a crisis line, it's not self-help, it is professional counseling done securely online.
You can send a message to your counselor anytime. You'll get timely and thoughtful responses, plus you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions, all without ever having to sit in an uncomfortable waiting room. And the best part is that it's more affordable than traditional offline counseling, and financial aid is available.
Find the particular expertise you need online. BetterHelp has licensed professional counselors who are specialized in virtually every area, and everything you say is completely confidential. We here at the Old Man and the Three want you to start living a happier life today. As a listener, you'll get 10% off your first month by visiting our sponsor at betterhelp.com/JJ. Join over 1 million people who have taken charge of their mental health. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/JJ. Yeah, I mean, the comparison, of course, would be coaching, right? And I think in a lot of ways, coaching at the youth level is different than coaching high school, is different than coaching college, is different than coaching in the NBA. And so much of coaching in the NBA is simply putting your players in a position to succeed, because the skill level and a lot of times the intellect is already there. So how do you create an environment to allow those strengths of each guy to sort of shine? I think it's sort of as simple as that. And it sounds like you're sort of saying it's the same thing on set.
I think it's the same thing. I really do. You try, you know what? It's kind of like with an NBA team where it's like casting. You get the people that are going to fit the script, and you brought them in because they're going to fit the script. And if there's something that doesn't quite go the way you thought, I will tend to go with the actor because I brought them in for that and I want them to challenge me. But the script is the playbook. That's why they're there. That's the plan. And then from that point on, we're all in the same boat together. Then it's a collaborative thing at that point. Who's the most hardcore coach you played for? Is it Coach K, where he's got a system you gotta plug and play? Or was there an NBA guy who was tougher? Like, what was Brett Brown like? He seems like a hard-nosed guy.
Brett was great. I wouldn't describe him as like the most like in your face coach that I've had. So Coach K, I always call Coach K Coach, but Coach K is probably the least plug and play guy I've had. He probably also cursed the most and cursed out players the most. But again, I think that's just the environment of college basketball. Coach K was like, what do my best players do well? I'm going to go make my best players look good. Like and everybody else sort of feeds off that. That's really what he did. My early years with Stan, I think, were the in terms of a coach really getting on me and pushing me to be better. That was probably the toughest I experienced, because by the time I left Orlando, I was sort of an established player. I went to a veteran team with Doc Rivers, and then I, of course, went to Philly with Brett, who was just one of the nicest human beings in the world, followed up by Alvin Gentry, one of the nicest human beings in the world, and then back with Stan this year, and of course now with Rick Carlisle.
I always thought Alvin Gentry looked like he would smoke. I always thought they should have let Alvin Gentry have a cigarette on the sideline. Like, just an exemption for him, that occasionally if he wants to light up a butt, Alvin, we don't know if you smoke or not, but you're allowed to. You're the only coach who can smoke.
Adam, we did a pod. Our correspondent on this show is Tyrese Halliburton, who's a rookie for the Kings. He might win. He might win rookie. He's great. He's an amazing kid. You guys would definitely get along. But he's already. I mean, JJ, we were talking to him last night about this. He's already got a million Alvin stories because Alvin's an assistant there, and he's only been there for 6 months. Like, the guy just has story after story.
I love that guy. He's one of my favorite coaches. The other one, what's the guy for the Blazers? Nurkic seems like he would smoke too. That's another one. I want to do my all NBA team of guys who look like they might smoke.
When you first said smoke, I thought you were talking about a joint. But yeah, the cigarette thing. Oh man, I can't remember. I don't know if it was Vlade Divac, but there were definitely rumors early in my career about certain European players that would go have a cigarette at halftime. Like, that's not inaccurate. So you mentioned Vice and Big Short and Succession, and so I don't want to like categorize this as like a huge pivot. I just kind of want to get your perspective on it, whether there was an impetus or a motivation to sort of reinvent a little bit of what you were doing, or was this sort of just a natural evolution of your filmmaking and producing?
Yeah, I've always been very interested in a lot of different things. I'm just a giant film fan, plain and simple. I watch all kinds of movies. I'm sure, like you guys, if there's a great documentary, I'll watch that. I'll go back and binge like a 1960s filmmaker. I love straight up comedies. I love everything. And I just happened to bump into a book, The Big Short, that was like, I'll do anything to make this. I see it. I think I know how to do it. I got very lucky that the company, Brad Pitt's company, Plan B, with Dee Dee Gardner, Jeremy Kleiner were open to me doing it. Some places wouldn't have been because I was known for the comedies. And once that kind of, did pretty well, I realized I had this freedom that I could do these other things. And I think the next thing I went to after that was Succession. And I just loved doing that. And then Vice was really difficult. That was like the hardest thing I've ever done. But still, that challenge was fun. So now it's been this great experience where with the new company I have, Hyperobject Industries, we're doing documentaries, we're doing dramas. We just wrapped a horror film that we shot up in Vancouver with Daisy Edgar Jones and this director Mimi Cave called Fresh. We have a docuseries about Q that's on HBO now. We're working on the Lakers series, which is a little fun, but a little dramatic. I'm working on the new movie, which is a little more of a comedy. So it's really ended up being kind of the perfect situation for someone who just has always loved movies and loved shows and just great storytelling, that we can do a million different things now.
Adam, we were talking about this before we started recording, but I mean, to take the podcast, for example, like, where do you get the energy a little bit? Because, most people, like, they would be like, I have this Netflix movie I'm working on, or I have this doc I'm working on. Like, that's my year, or maybe you do 2 things or something like that. And you just named about 18 things that you're working on, and you probably are just scratching the surface. Like, how do you kind of juggle all of these and make sure you're spending kind of the requisite amount of time that you need to be on them? I
mean, I think I can answer this honestly now because it's legal, but I microdose cocaine on a regular basis. And no, JJ hung in for 1 second. I could see him be polite.
No. Listen, I actually thought you were going to say LSD, and I was like, oh, it all makes sense. The guy's microdosing LSD.
Yeah, we've had weirder answers.
Here's the trick. People ask this all the time. The trick is I have a company. So I have amazing producers. I have Betsy Koch, I have Todd Schulman, Maeve Cullinan, Kevin Messick, and they're incredible at what they do. Todd used to run Sacha Baron Cohen's company. He's amazing. He did the QAnon doc series. He was lead producer on that with Colin Hoback. Kevin Messick is lead producer on Succession. So it allows me to jump around from project to project. Like I said, Jody Avirgan was lead producer on the podcast. Him and a bunch of other great producers. Raghu Manlevin did a lot of the producing, getting the guests. Brian Steele helped with a lot of the writing. So that's how you do it. You guys know it's, and Tommy, I know you do a million things too. And JJ's playing in the NBA while doing a podcast. The trick is you have people set it up for you. They make it easy. And I get to have like the fun part of all these projects.
Do you, as you've sort of expanded and the company's gotten bigger, was it ever hard to relinquish some control on projects? Was that ever a difficult thing for you to do?
It could be really tricky because when you do, like, you're trusting these producers. And in the case, like Ferrell and I had a company for, God, what was it, like 14 years, Gary Sanchez Productions. And in that case too, like, he had his kind of lead person, Jessica Elbaum, who was amazing. I had my lead person, Kevin Messick, but both our names went on everything. So yeah, it was tricky. Sometimes there would be a project. I tried to always be on it, whatever was happening. But with that company, with like 2 kind of lead people, there was a lot of stuff coming through. So one of the things I really try and do with the new company is like nothing gets through the chute unless I'm really love it. Like, I do a gut check moment for all these projects because I don't mind, eating it or falling and like taking it in the mouth on something that's I love and it just didn't go well. But it's tricky when too much stuff gets going. So yeah, I really try and have a gut check moment with all these projects where I really like talk with the producer, like, are you ready to go to war for this? Are we okay if this goes awry? Do we love it enough? And are we willing to put the hours in on it? So yeah, it's true. Producing is a very difficult thing because it's not you doing it. You're helping, you're riding sidecar, you're vouching for it. And the creative lead is ultimately going to be the final word, and you got to have their back no matter what.
Adam, one idea before you run. So we've talked about this in the show before. JJ has never acted in anything. He was supposed to be in that show One Tree Hill back in the 2000s, then he bailed at the last minute, and so he had like a part, he didn't show up, and it would have. If there's a part in this Lakers show I feel like this show is going to win, knock on wood, is going to win a bunch of Emmys. I think it would be good for the Old Man and the Three to have some gold. So just keep it in the back of your mind, or maybe drop it on some of your producers in the off season.
Or any project down the line. I'm open to anything, Adam. I just want to be clear. I'm open to anything.
We all know each other. We're all fans of it, whatever. We're all in the same circle. Let's just get this done right now. And I'm going to offer you a role live on this podcast.
Amazing.
It's not a huge role, but
Okay.
it's about 7 lines.
Oh my God. God.
Jerry Seasting. The
Okay.
role of Jerry Seasting, 9th man. No, I'm kidding.
He's doing cocaine, microdosing cocaine again.
Jerry Seasting. Did I go too old head on that?
You went too much. I don't know that reference. I should
have gone Danny Ainge.
I'll play Danny. I'll play Danny.
That would be amazing. That would be amazing.
Are you kidding me, man? I'm no joke. I'm going to text Max Borenstein and Roddy Barnes, who are the show producers, and I'm going to let them know you're down, and we are going to get you in that show. That is happening.
Amazing. Adam, this has been awesome. We really appreciate the time.
So much fun. Great talking with you guys. Love this podcast. And I feel like we could talk for hours. I want to ask JJ about 70 questions.
You got to come back.
Anytime, gents. Thank you.